See if this is working. How you guys doing? You there? How's the quarantine going? I don't have any kids where I'm at right now, so it's quiet. It's definitely quiet. So hope you guys are doing well. So welcome to the ZClassroom live session stuff. So we're doing this thing right now because you guys are all at home, working from home, and we're trying to do some things to kind of get people into ZBrush, people that are looking for something to do. You know, if you have a lot of time on your hands now, so time to pick up the trial here that I got on screen, and you can start learning some sculpting stuff. So this is the ZBrush at home or ZClassroom live stuff that we start doing this week. So one of us developers will be going every single day this week. And with this, for my stream, the focus is going to be like beginning ZBrush stuff. So I'm going to go through, like, if you just got the trial and you just installed it and it's your first time touching this stuff, you know, how can you go by getting ZBrush to work? So some of the stuff here at the start, if you're already fluent with ZBrush, is going to be probably a little bit basic for you guys if you're watching. But the whole goal is to kind of get, you know, people that are, you know, coming into ZBrush for maybe the first time, or just, you know, have some time now to start messing with it, to pick it up and actually use it. So good to see you guys. Thank you all. So for GoZ should be working. I've got questions in the chat here. I'm just going through quick. So if it's not, just send a ticket to support, support.pixologic.com, and we can take a look at it. And yes, Scorpion, this is going to be the relearn ZBrush stream here. So I'm going to go through the very, very basics, try to make it not as daunting, and go through that steps. I'm glad, thank you Dark Knight, I'm glad you like the Ask ZBrush stuff. I appreciate it. All right, so we're going to hop over to ZBrush, because basically for these 2-hour sessions, I want to get through like the whole thing in one session. So I don't want to like go part 1, part 2. So this is going to be it. So I'm going to get you in here, get you sculpting, get you doing something for this 2 hours. And then next class, which will be Friday, will be a whole nother thing focused on building from this one, but doing another project that's basically in that 2-hour segment. So for this, when you launch ZBrush, this is what you're going to be greeted with. And so with this, we have Lightbox that's going to open up. And Lightbox is a browser that's internal to ZBrush. It's going to allow you to see different things that you can load inside the application. So think of it as like a, there's a Photoshop one that they use for the browsing stuff. So it's similar to kind of that, where you can just see all the files. Now, one thing nice about this Lightbox here is that you're going to be able to get previews of your files that you're saved out. So this isn't going to be anything that's going to be native inside of Windows, but if you open up a folder inside of ZBrush and you have a bunch of ZTLs, you're going to be able to see those files in there. So these are just kind of giving you a visual representation of what's in the file. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is, when you get into ZBrush, is you're going to want to load a project. Now, if you don't have Lightbox open, when it starts ZBrush, it should open automatically if this is the first time you've launched ZBrush. You may need to come up here and click this Lightbox button, and this will toggle that open and closed. And then you can also press comma on your keyboard, which will open and close that as well. So basically, if you start ZBrush, the first thing you want to do is come to Lightbox here, and I recommend clicking on one of these files that are in here. And these files, if you hover over them, will have a .zpr after them. And the ZPR is just a ZBrush project file. And these are going to load in and set up your scene. You're going to be brought into 3D mode instantly, and you're just going to be able to sculpt. So first people that are new to ZBrush, open up Lightbox here as soon as it launches, and I'd recommend probably starting with this Sphere 128 here. And to load these in, just double click, and that is now going to load that file right in. Now you'll notice when I load the project file, you saw when I had Lightbox open initially, I had some black borders going around the screen. But when you load a project file in, most of the times, any of the projects that are in Lightbox are going to come in and they're going to fill your canvas space all the way around the edges. So you're going to get the most out of ZBrush while you're working in it. Now, the first thing to go through with ZBrush when you launch it up is navigation. And if you're a beginner inside of ZBrush, you know, I highly recommend coming over here to these move, scale, and rotates, and use these for the first time using the application. So if you click and drag on move, you're going to be able to move your object around your scene. If you click and drag on zoom, you're going to be able to zoom. And if you click and drag on this, you're going to be able to rotate. Now you have this little demo head here that's going to allow you to see your front, back, and side positions. So as you do the rotate, you're going to be able to see that transforming in the screen there. And so that's going to let you know what angle you're looking at in your scene. Now these zoom, scale, and rotates, or these scroll, zoom, and actual up here at the top, are going to be related to your canvas. So these aren't going to, move your model around or zoom in and out. So the ones you want to do for navigation are this move, zoom, and rotate. The ones on the top here, if you end up using any of these, you'll see that your model may end up starting to get pixelated, because basically what you're doing is you're zooming in 2D. So think of these as like a digital zoom. So if you ever have a camera and you digital zoom in and out, it's going to get pixelated because it's just going into the image to get you closer. So if you come up here and you accidentally manipulate any of these, what you can do is just click this actual button here, and it'll return it back to where it was originally. But for any of your navigation stuff, what you want to do, if you're a first-time user, is probably use these little buttons here, and you just hover over them and then click and drag, and they'll perform that process. So I'm looking at questions here. So Jimmy, I'm going to write this down. Jimmy's asking about storing brushes, and I should be able to cover that, but I need to get through this other stuff first. So I've made a note for you, Jimmy. Made a note. Oh, so this is basics. I'm trying to get people into ZBrush here, Sebastian. All right, so with the basics here, continue on to this, I have a little thing I'm going to drag over here that's going to allow you to see the keyboard presses. I'm just going to pull this over to my scene here. And so while I go the processes here inside of ZBrush, you'll be able to see my mouse movement down here. You'll be able to see what buttons I press. So if I'm holding down Alt, Control, Shift, and so we'll go through all this kind of stuff, right? So as I'm doing this, you guys can actually see this happening. Now, after you got the basics navigation over here, you can move into a little more advanced stuff. Now, the initial thing that's probably the hardest thing when I was first learning ZBrush was the zoom in. So this was doing this with your mesh with this alt-click process. So if you're new to ZBrush on this, I recommend probably not getting into that yet. So for the basic canvas navigation minus the zoom, you can just click off in space to rotate your model. Let me just make a mark here quick so you can see this, to rotate your model. And while you rotate, you can hold down Shift, and this will lock you into the front, back, side axes. So if you're rotating, and then as you rotate past a certain point, if you hold down Shift, it's going to lock it in. So this way you can rotate your model, so just clicking off the canvas, rotating, hold down Shift, rotating, hold down Shift, and that's going to give you that rotation access around your mesh. Now if you hold down the Alt key and you click and drag in the space over here, this is going to allow you to move or pan your model so you can move it around. So those are the very basic ones that I'd say if you're doing canvas navigation and you're first time ZBrush user, these are going to be the ones you're going to be able to catch on. So clicking and dragging will perform a rotation, holding down Shift will snap it to front, back, side, and then holding down Alt and clicking and dragging in open space will do a pan. And then for zoom in right now, just if you're first time, just use this option here to zoom in. If you want to try to figure out the Alt zoom function, it's a little bit challenging if you're a first time user. I know I struggled with it initially when I was doing it. So the process for that is you hold down Alt, you click, and then you release Alt, and while you still have the pen down, you then drag. So that's the zoom process. So hold Alt, click, release Alt, drag. So this one, after a while, it's going to be like second nature if you're doing the alt-click navigation, which is the one that I end up using inside of ZBrush. But for now, if you're just starting out, use this zoom right here. Now, the next principles inside of ZBrush is if you're first time, like grabbing the sphere, you can start sculpting something very easily. And the basic things I try to teach people on this is there's a ton of stuff in ZBrush that you can get overwhelmed with. I mean, there's a lot in here. And if you've seen it in our other streams, when we go into stuff like there's a button over here you press, and then you press one over here, and then you press one over here, and then you use this slider and something like that, and it gives you a result. But if you just want to get into ZBrush and just sculpt, it's very simple. All you need to do is to create a positive mark on your model, is simply come across the model and click and drag, and that's going to sculpt in a positive fashion. Now, if you have a tablet or a Cintiq device, or even if you're using different things, probably pen devices, any pen device, when you do this, you're going to have pressure sensitivity as well. And so what this means is if you come across the model and I'm just clicking and dragging, and this is going to give me a light stroke on the model, but if I click and drag and press really hard, I'm going to get a heavy stroke. So that is pressure sensitivity. And this is going to come to play because I can come through and do very light marks on my mesh, or I can come in and do very heavy marks. And one thing you're not going to be able to get with a mouse is that control. So I highly recommend getting a pen tablet or a device that uses a pen with pressure sensitivity. It's going to end up making your workflow inside of ZBrush much better. So to sculpt positive on things, it's just simply click and drag, and that's it. That's the entire process for sculpting positive. Now, if you make a mark and you don't like it, you can use Control-Z to undo. So if I press down Control on my keyboard and then click Z, this will perform the undo process. And I can go back pretty much all the way through till the initial stage in my ZBrush session. So I can get all the way back to that main sphere. So if I start doing a stroke and then I decide I don't like it, Control-Z will undo. If I want to redo the stroke that I just did, the hotkey for this is Control-Shift and then Z. So Control-Shift-Z will redo, Control-Z will undo. So that'll allow you to redo and undo, and they're going to be really your friends inside of ZBrush as you start sculpting stuff. Now that we've got the basics of sculpting positive, which is just clicking and dragging, to sculpt in or carve into a model, you just need to hold down Alt and click and drag, and then this will perform that carve in. So just holding down the Alt key and then clicking and dragging will cut into the surface. So you can cut in like that, and then if I release Alt, I can sculpt positively, hold Alt again, sculpt negatively, and this stroke will build up over time too. So if you keep sculpting in, you're going to see it's going to get deeper and deeper into the surface of the model. So those are your two basic sculpting techniques. So click and drag for positive, Alt click and drag for negative, and that's going to give you those two surface options. Now the next process that you're going to add to your arsenal is holding down Shift. So if I hold down the Shift key and come across a model, this is now going to perform a smooth. So it's looking at the surface and it's now going to smooth it out. So Alt click cuts in, just click and drag adds, and then holding down Shift will come back in and smooth. And that will now give you the ability to come through and start creating a lot of stuff just with those three key combinations. So using Alt to drag it out, using Shift to add back up, and then smoothing in over top of things. And that's going to allow you to get, pretty much you could use just those options and sculpt an entire character inside of ZBrush. Now in addition to these stroke types here, you may want to adjust your brush size as well. And you have a few different ways you can do this. So one way is if I want to make it larger and smaller, I can just use the bracket keys on my keyboard. So this is kind of like the Photoshop process here, where you can come in and just hold one bracket or hold the other bracket, and you're going to get a larger or smaller brush size. Now the size slider that pertains to this is right here. So when you can change this to also increase or decrease your draw size here. Now you'll notice when you're sculpting, your brush has these two circles that are around where you're sculpting on your mesh. And this is controlling the focal shift up here. So if you change this focal shift, you're going to be able to determine how much fall off that brush is going to get as you come across your model. So draw size and focal shift. Now the intensity will also determine how strong the stroke's going to be, and that can be determined by changing this slider right here. So you can come up here and make your brush stronger if needed. And that's also going to go with your pen pressure too. So right now, if I have my intensity set to say 30, when I press down as hard as I can on my pen tablet, it's going to give me that 30 intensity, and then if I press really light, it's going to go all the way down to 0. So this is going to set your max for your brush intensity as you sculpt. So I'm going to undo this back to my original sphere here, just by Control-Z. And then I'm just going to rotate and then hold down Shift to snap this back into position. Let me look at these questions here quick. We have questions about, do you think the pandemic will delay ZBrush production? I'm working full-time still. So no, we have not been stopped by any of the pandemic stuff. I will be covering the ZModeler one in the future, so I think that'll be next week. I think Friday is ZModeler, next Friday. Not this coming Friday, but the Friday after I'll be going over ZModeler. And we have another question. When I sculpt, my brushes are Z-subbing all the time unless my size is huge. That one, I'm not sure what would be causing that. It should be cutting in or cutting out. So you may want to, Sinister Ghost, you may just want to send in a ticket to support. If you have any questions or things that you run into or potential bugs that you come across inside of ZBrush, if you come to the Help tab here, there's a Pixologic support link that you can click on, and this will allow you to take you to support, and you can actually submit a ticket. Also, some other learning information here. If you're new to ZBrush as well, we have an online docs section you can go search, and it'll find out if you have any keywords inside of ZBrush. We have a lot of those. If you kind of want to figure out, well, what does, decimation do? What is decimation? You can search our online docs, and there's information on that. We also have ZClassroom, which has a whole bunch of videos that are pre-recorded, and you can go and browse those. You can start and stop them. You can come back to them later and pick up where you left off. All sorts of things there. And then ZBrush Live is what you guys hopefully are viewing me on right now. And then ZBrush Central is our community hub, which is our forum. So there's a bunch of different information you can get on there. You can post images, works in progresses, whatever you desire about ZBrush. So it's kind of the ZBrush Central area to go to. So definitely use that as well. All right, so now that we've started sculpting with our standard here, we can come in, we increase our draw size and make things larger and smaller. Now, another process we want to add to our arsenal is we've added the control, we had just the click and drag, the alt click and drag, and the shift click and drag. Now we want to also add control. Now, if I hold down control, you're going to see that my brush over here is going to switch. So it's currently in the standard brush, but if I hold down control, you can see it's changing to mask pen. So when I hold down control and I come across a mesh here, change my draw size down and drag this out, this is going to allow me to mask the area on my model. And now I'm going to protect this area with this mask from the sculpting that I'm going to do. So this is allowing you to come through and protect areas on your mesh. So I can mask out different portions. And then now when I come across and sculpt, you're going to see that it's going to go around the mask. So any areas that are masked are going to be protected from that. Now I can come in and smooth around this here and kind of get that form there. Now after you've drawn a mask by holding control, you can also erase the mask by holding control and alt. So control will give you the mask, holding control and alt will give you the not masked, and you can come through and unmask areas. So I can come through and say unmask these portions there, and then if I come back in and sculpt, you'll see that I'm only going to affect those unmasked areas. Now if I want to globally clear the mask on my model, I can come to the side or off the canvas here and make sure I have control held down, and then I can click and drag to drag out a mask rectangle. And if you do this in a blank spot of the canvas, when you release, it's going to clear your mask. So if I come in and mask by holding control and then decide I don't want the mask, I can hold control, drag off the model and release, and that's going to clear it. Now if you want to invert your mask, there's a process for that as well. So I can apply the mask, and then if I want this part to be unmasked and everything else to be masked, come over to the blank spot again, make sure I'm holding down control. And now instead of dragging that rectangle, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click. And this click is just going to flip or invert the mask. So holding control and clicking off the model will invert your mask. And if you hold control and click and drag, it's going to clear the mask. Now you can also use this control drag off the model as well to come back onto your model. And this will allow you to apply square masking to your mesh. So if I wanted to mask out this side here and that side, I can do that really quick and then I can clear it out. So a bunch of different things you can do with masking. Now there's a bunch of other masking options. You can change how it's going to actually affect your mesh. You can blur it and do other things, but if you're just initially starting out, just the ability of coming in and applying a mask with control, holding down alt to erase the mask is going to be what I'd recommend to kind of start doing there. And then you can invert it really quick, and then you can come back in and sculpt, and that's going to give you protected areas on your models, and this is going to allow you to get some nice transitions and things. So if you want a strong transition between two shapes, apply a mask, sculpt the other side, and you're going to get a nice shelf between the two. So masking is the last option there for your brush stuff. So I'm going to hit Control Z and just get back here. You can also come to this little bar here. This is the undo history bar, and you can just come up and click on the very first icon here, and that'll go back all the way to the beginning there, so you can get back to your initial sphere. Now, so far, all I've been sculpting with is the standard brush. So you can pretty much get anything you would like out of sculpting with the standard brush, but we have some other bells and whistles we can add to it. And these are a whole bunch of different brushes that ship with ZBrush. And these are going to give you different form or function to your designs. So you can see with the standard brush, I get this nice soft fall off, but it's not usually preferred sometimes, especially if you want a clay look on things, or maybe you want to get like some rough edges or some quick blockouts. So my preferred brush to go to that I usually sculpt with probably about 75% of the time is the Claybuildup brush. And to access the default brushes that ship with ZBrush, you just need to come over here to this brush palette and open this up. And in here, let me move my keyboard here, you'll have all these brushes in here. Now you can come through and select these manually. So if I want to say the Claybuildup brush, I can come and locate the Claybuildup brush and simply click that, and that's going to allow me to select that brush. Now the top pick bar here will automatically show you the brushes that you've used last. So you can see like the standard brush is up here, now the Claybuildup brush is up here. If I select flakes and then come back up here, now that's going to be up here. So if you've used a brush before, this is going to show you ones that you've used before in the session. So you can kind of quickly come up here and select them rather than have to go through this entire list down here. Now, instead of using, the hunt and peck method where you click on the thing and then open it up, we can also use hotkeys. And the hotkeys for brushes, I'm going to move my thing over here and try to get it so it's not blocking, is going to be based on brush presets, okay? And so the brush presets have names, right? So the hotkeys for selecting your brushes are going to be based on these names that these presets have. So as an example, let's say I want to access the standard brush again. So I can first hit B on my keyboard, which is going to open up that brush palette. And then I can hit S, which is going to isolate all the brushes by S. And I'm going to hide my little visual stuff here. Let me hide this so you guys can see this. Wait for it. Let's hide that. And let's get the title out of there for a minute. And then that as well. There we go. Let's try this one more time so you guys can see this. Let's move this back up here. So to change brushes, I can hit B to open up my brush palette. And then in here, if I want to select the standard brush, I just need to remember the name of the brush. So the name of the standard brush begins with S, so I can hit S. And you'll see as soon as I hit that second letter, so B opens up the brush window, S is going to trigger only showing me the brushes that begin with S. And then you'll see next to all the brushes that begin with S, there's another letter. So if I come down here to the standard brush, you'll see that there's a letter T next to it. So for me to select the standard brush, I now just need to simply click B, which opens that brush palette, S, which isolates by the letter S, and then T, which is now going to select the standard brush. So if I ever want to come through and select the standard brush again, just using hotkeys, just remember it's B, S, T, and that's going to give me the standard brush. Now let's say I want to select the Claybuildup brush. So that's this brush right here, right? So let's hit B again. I know the Claybuildup brush starts with C, so I'm going to hit C. And then you'll see that the Claybuildup brush has a B next to it. So C, B, B, or B, C, B, there we go. And then that will give me Claybuildup. So B, S, T, standard brush, B, C, B, Claybuildup brush. So that is how the hotkeys inside of ZBrush works for brushes. And once you get a few of these brushes and they store in the back of your head, you're gonna be able to go through and get these really fast. So like just switching brushes now, since I've been using ZBrush for a while, they're just second nature. Like I know if I want to go to the move brush, it's BMV. If I want to go to the pinch brush, BPI. So there's all sorts of different hotkeys, and you just need to remember basically the letter of the brush that it begins with, and then the second letter that corresponds with it. So really fast stuff there to switch brushes. But you can still always come through and go to the brush palette up here and select it manually as well. Nothing wrong with that process either. So I'm gonna go back to the Claybuildup brush, and this brush is one of my favorite brushes because it has this buildup process that's set on it, and it also has an alpha link to it. So any brushes inside of ZBrush you can customize, you can change different settings for them. But a lot of these we have set for presets, so you can just use some of these right out the gate. So with the Claybuildup brush, when you draw with this brush, you're going to see it's going to give you this edge, right? So it's coming through, and as I'm drawing this out, it's taking this alpha and it's repeating it, right? So it's basically a standard brush. It would look like this, but with this alpha on it, it's now getting this result. And what I like to do with the Claybuildup brush is I use it to build up in like a cross-hatching section. So I come through and do this kind of process of going through and just kind of building up. So I'll come in and just do this cross-hatching, and then I'll come in and hold Alt and go underneath it, and then I'll use Shift to come back in and smooth. And so this is how I like to basically build up forms on my model. So I'll come in and, find some different silhouettes and block them in really quick. And all I'm doing for this is, you can see my little mouse over here, so I'm just pressing down with the pen pressure and adding the form there. And then if I want to cut in, I hold down Alt, I can get striping away, and then I'll come back in and build on top of this. And then I'll hold Shift and smooth it out. And I kind of just repeat this process back and forth. So this is your basics of ZBrush. And with just this functionality, you can get anything sculpted. Some of the stuff would take longer because you aren't using all the tricks or everything that's inside of ZBrush, but you can definitely get everything sculpted you want just using this. And just think about it as you're sculpting as if you were in clay. So I can come in and sculpt, dig in, dig out, add my forms, and keep playing with the surfaces until I get something I like. So all sorts of things you can do with just those simple things. So when I teach people, basically how to use ZBrush for the first time, this is it. You don't have to go too in depth. Just get the very basics into it, and then you can start playing and start having some fun. Now, in addition to this, there's some other brushes I want to hit on quick too that I'd say are the first brushes you want to come to. So we already covered the standard brush, the Claybuildup brush. The pinch brush was the other brush that I mentioned. So BPI is going to give you the pinch. And this one's going to allow you to come through and kind of strengthen areas. So as I come across this area here, you can see I'm pinching, and now I'm getting a nice harsh edge. And I'm going to try to use the zoom down here to get you guys used to that. And so now you can see I've come through and I've pinched that area there, and it's given me that harsh edge now around that surface. And then if it's too harsh, I can smooth it back out. But the pinch is really good for coming in and just adding details like that. Now the next one we have is the Dam Standard brush. So I can go to the brush palette again with B, isolate by the letter D, and then I'm going to find the Dam Standard brush, which is S, so BDS. Now the Dam Standard brush is a great brush for creating carves in your mesh. And it's set up automatically to carve in. So if I come through here and carve, you can see it's going to dig into the surface. And I can use this to start digging into the mesh here. So I can come through and add little dig-in details. And then I can use Shift again to smooth. Now the Shift option is also going to be brush sensitive. So if you have a pen tablet with pressure, you can lightly smooth out when holding Shift 2. It'll respond to your brush pressure. And you can see you can just come in and start scraping into the surface. So that's the Dam Standard brush. And then the last one is the Move brush, which is another one that's pretty much a go-to as well. So hitting B on my keyboard, bring up the brush menu here, hitting M, and then hitting V. That'll give me the Move brush. And this one I usually use with a larger draw size here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And I can come in now and take these sides of my model and just start pulling these in and distorting it. And this will make you give large changes on your surface. So you can come in and start playing with the forms in these large ways. So this is another good one for moving stuff around. You just kind of manipulate where you want, and then after you have it, you can go back in and start sculpting. So another little thing there with the Move brush, and then I usually go back to, say, the Claybuildup brush, smaller draw size, and just start sculpting this out. So those are the brush basics there, and pretty much the standard brushes I usually end up going to are those ones that I've listed off there. And you can start getting different designs out of your meshes. So now you'll notice that, we're at a stage that I've got some sort of weird alien creature here. And the next thing I want to cover real quick is saving. Okay, so let's say you've gotten this far into your model and now you want to save it. Now, saving in ZBrush is a little bit weird. So most of the times in other applications, you come to, a menu that's over here and save. So we have a little different way to save inside of ZBrush, and you have three things that have like a save as option on them. The first one, if you come to document and open this up, move my little board here. I'm gonna put my menus back on now. Let's put those on quick so Kyle doesn't yell at me. There we go, we're back. And so the first thing up here, if you come to the document palette, there's a save as. Now the document palette isn't gonna save any part of your 3D mesh, nothing like that. This palette here is for saving images. So if I want to come through and I want to export out an image, I can use this option here. Or if I want to save just the canvas, I can use this option here. So if you're a new time user of ZBrush, the document palette is probably not where you want to be at all right now. So you can use this to export, which I'll cover at the a little bit later here. But basically these two here you want to stay away from. So this save and save as are not going to save your file. This will just save a 2.5D version of it. And so when you open this back up, you're not going to be able to rotate around it. You're not going to do anything like that. So just stay out of the document palette. Now the one that I'd recommend using if you're a first-time user is in the File menu. And in the File menu here we have a Save As. And this Save As is going to save a project file. So this was the same kind of file that we started this session with, which was that sphere. And so I went into the lightbox area there and I double clicked a project file and that loaded the model in, started it in 3D, and then I could start sculpting. So if you're a first time user, go to File and go to Save As and save out that ZPR file. And then with that, you'll be able to reopen that file and it's gonna bring in your undo histories, it'll bring in your model in 3D, and then anything you have over here in the tool palette. So first time user ZBrush, File, Save As, use that. Now, the next option you have with the File Save As or saving a project file is to just use this Quick Save button at the top here. And this Quick Save button is just going to save a project to a Quick Save folder. Now, this Quick Save folder does live in a user's directory on your machine. And so if you have any issues with ZBrush and they ask you to say uninstall or reinstall or delete this folder, your quick saves are going to be in there. So make sure you back these up. One caveat for using the quick saves. But when you click this button here, it's going to go ahead and just save the file, right? And that's it, it's done. So it's gone through and saved. Now, next time I open ZBrush, if I want to come in and load where I left off, I just need to go into Lightbox by coming up here and clicking this or pressing comma on my keyboard. And then in here at the top, you'll see there's a quick save folder. And if I go to this quick save folder here, you should have your model show up. Now the quick save will also save as you're working inside of ZBrush. So after, by default, I think it's 15 minutes, it will save every 15 minutes. So you may have multiple quick saves in this folder. And to open these, you just come across them and double click and that'll load that saved file back in. Now, if you highlight over this as well, you'll see this is the path where those quick saves are being stored. So you can see it is in the users, public, documents, ZBrush data, quick save folder there. So thing there for just saving new time users, quick saves is a real easy way to do. You don't have to go to any menus. You can just sculpt, not worry about anything else. Come up here, click quick save. This is automatically going to save it. And then if you go into Lightbox here, you're going to see I'm going to get a new version of that file. And then to close Lightbox, you can click this hide button or press comma on your keyboard. Now, finally, we have the tool menu over here, and you can see this has a save as option as well, and also a load. Now, the tool is what this file is right here. But when you save a tool, nothing else is going to go with the tool. It's only going to take what you have selected and then the variables and values that are in this tool menu. So if I save this file out as a tool, it's not going to take my background color. It's not going to take any lighting. It's not going to take any custom materials. It's not going to take anything else. So it's only going to save the tool. So to delete the files from Quick Save, you can go to Preferences and you can go to Quick Save here, and there is a Delete Quick Save Files. So we had a question asking, how can I delete the files from Quick Save? So you can do this option here. So just in the Preferences palette, Quick Save, Delete Quick Save Files. And you can also just go to that directory on your computer and just delete quick saves out of there too. So you can move those out of there. They're just ZPR files. It's just that the quick save is going to automatically save those to those folder and then set a value for them. So you can just click the button and be done with it and not have to worry about it. So that's the quick save. So back to the tool palette over here. So we talked about the save as is just going to save what's in your tool palette over here. Now the important note in the tool palette is that you have the import and export options. And so this is going to allow you to import files from external applications or export files to external applications. And so clicking these, if you have any, you want to mess with ZBrush for use with scan data, or maybe, send some models out that you've made inside of ZBrush for 3D printing, these are the buttons you're going to want to use. So the file menu up here is only going to be for saving those project files, which are basically doing the same thing as this quick save option here. But if you want to export a model out for an external application or import a model in from an external application, you want to use this import and export buttons here. So one little thing with the tool palette over here, that if you are a new user from ZBrush and you want to find out how to import a file or export a file, and the file formats we can import are all pretty much your standard ones. So if you come here, you can see we've got OBJs, we've got Maya, MA files, FBX, PLY, STLs. And so those are mostly the global ones that will go across any applications. And one thing to note when you're importing in a file into ZBrush, if you have that file you're importing into ZBrush set at a specific scale, when the file is imported in, ZBrush will retain that scale, and then you can sculpt on that mesh, and then you can export it back out. So little note there too as well in terms of importing. So now that I've got my mesh here, we're gonna go through the process. I'm just gonna get a new project here, a new sphere to start over. Actually, we'll talk about this quick. So as I was sculpting this mesh, you can see that I'm getting some tessellation through the stuff. So as I came in with, say, that Claybuildup brush, and I started sculpting here, you can see I'm not really getting a clean stroke on my mesh. Now if I come up here and sculpt, you can see this is looking better, but if I come here, you can see I'm getting this kind of stipulated form. And this is basically happening because right now we're just taking a mesh that had a certain topology, and I've just twisted it and moved it around and distorted it, and I've stretched and pulled that topology. And so some areas of my mesh now have less topology than others. And so if I turn on my polyframes here, you can see the difference in the tessellation on the mesh here. Let me turn off my wires. So you can see where I did that pinch. It took a bunch of that geometry and it pulled it together. And then when it pulls it together, it's giving me that topology there so I can get that sharp form out of it. However, when it was doing that process, it had to stretch the polygons that were on the other edges of it. And then this gives me less topology in areas like this. So you can see as I was using that brush, I now don't have enough topology here to support that stroke. Now there are multiple ways you can deal with this inside of ZBrush. So we have things called subdivision surfaces where you can start dividing this mesh, and this is going to throw divisions for the geometry across the entire surface. You could also use Dynamesh, which is going to go through and look at your mesh and then reflood it with even topology, and then you can go back and sculpt on that surface. The process I'd recommend if you're a first-time user of ZBrush is to come up here and activate Sculptris Pro. Let me move this there. Now, Sculptris Pro is a dynamic tessellation system. And tessellation is a term for increasing the geometry on your mesh. So the size of your triangles. So to increase the tessellation, I'm going to add more triangles to my model, which is going to give me more resolution, which is then going to allow me to attain a stronger brush stroke. So if I come up here and activate this Sculptris Pro option up here, this is going to now look at my brush size. And if my brush size is small or large, it's going to add the tessellation or the triangulation to my mesh based on that size. So as an example, if I come across this model here and I sculpt with Claybuildup, you can see as I'm doing this, I'm not getting any geometry increase, right? It's just taking what's already there, it's moving the vertices where I'm putting my brush stroke, and it's pushing them up if I'm just clicking and dragging, and if I'm holding Alt, it's gonna push them down. And that's all it's doing across the surface. It's taking those vertices, or those points on the mesh, and wherever I sculpt, it's just moving them in space, okay? And so as I do this with the Claybuildup brush, you can see it's just taking the existing topology and it's just manipulating it, okay? So now let's come up here and let's activate Sculptris. Now Sculptris Pro is gonna look at my brush size, which is now set to 31. And it's going to determine, hey, if I sculpt across the surface, what's the optimal resolution I need to obtain a clean stroke at that draw size. So as I come across this mesh now and click and drag, you're going to see it's going to dynamically add triangles or tessellate the model along that stroke. So you can see if I zoom in here, as I do this, it's adding geometry, and it's adding geometry to support that stroke. And so if I turn my polyframes off here, you can see now I'm getting enough topology to hold those marks I'm making. And so this is huge in terms of what you can do now with ZBrush. So now you can kind of work at this as it is clay, right? So if I have a ball of clay and I cut into a surface of my mesh, it's going to give me a clean cut. Like, I'm not going to have this stair-step version if I cut on this side of the model and then a really clean one if I cut somewhere else. So activating Sculptris Pro is going to allow you to come in and do this automatically for you as you sculpt. So if I come back across this area of my model here and now start sculpting, I'm going to get a clean stroke wherever I go. And so you see sometimes you'll get, little sparse areas where you've stretched the polygons a lot, but if you come over it a few times, it's going to add that triangulation in there. And if I turn on my polyframes, you can see wherever I'm sculpting or making a mark on my model now, it's adding tessellation to it. Now, the amount of triangulation or tessellation that's being added is dependent on your draw size. So if I come up here and make a large draw size, and I come across this mesh and drag out, you can see I'm getting some triangulation, but I'm not getting as much if I make it a really small draw size and then click and drag. So you can see the difference here in the amount of polygons that's being added with a small draw size versus a large draw size. And the defaults for Sculptris Pro are going to go through and use this for any brush process that can use a standard type brush. So the move brush has a different algorithm, so that one's not going to give you tessellation as you move it, but you can use a brush called Snake Hook, which is going to give you tessellation as you perform a move. So now with my Sculptris Pro enabled, I come in and I can start flushing out some more stuff here. So I can start using this kind of process of coming through. I can also smooth, and the smooth process is also going to add or decrease this triangulation as I use it. And once again, this is going to be based on your brush size. So you can see holding down Shift to get that smooth brush. If I come across the surface here, you can see as I come across at a draw size of 46, this is the amount of topology it's giving me. If I increase my draw size and hold down Shift and still smooth, you see now I'm going to come in and it's going to give me less. So I can use this to my advantage too, and I can actually come through and get a large draw size and then hold down Shift and smooth out details. And this will also reduce topology in my area. So I can come through and get a really big draw size and come across the back here, and you'll see it's going to reduce that topology quite a bit. But this is also going to allow me to get a faster smooth on that model and kind of remove stuff that may be wasteful or different parts of the model that I may not want to mess with anymore. So you can actually come through and erase your entire sketch pretty quick by just holding down Shift with Sculptris Pro on and then remove details you don't want. So another big handy thing there. So with Sculptris Pro, I just opened up another menu. I was trying not to hit this, but this is one of my common keys. So if you press spacebar, this will also give you this pop-up menu here, and a lot of the different values that live up on the top here can be accessed in this pop-up menu. So you can see in here I have my brush I can select. I also have my draw size. Now when you just press spacebar initially, it should put your cursor right over your draw size, unless it's all the way down at the bottom here, and then it won't get to that draw size area. But if you're sculpting in the middle of your screen and you press spacebar, it should put your cursor right at draw, and then you can just quickly change your draw size there. You can also use the hotkey of S, which will open up just the draw size slider, and you can change your slider there. So another little way to change your brush size. Spacebar is usually the one that my brain goes to, so I was trying to stay away from it, but I've pressed space, and there you go. So now you guys get a little tidbit information there. A little more advanced stuff. So I'm going to come through and just now sculpt for a little bit on this mesh, and we're going to make some sort of alien creature here. Now, when you're doing this, the main thing is that what I'm sculpting oftentimes is rotating around your model and looking at the different angles and different forms. Now, I usually always keep Sculptris on, so as I'm doing this, I can add topology where I want it, and you'll see when I do the Claybuildup brush, I do a lot of this kind of stuff. So I bring out my forms like this, rather than coming through and drawing them out like this. Because I feel this gives me a little more control than I have with not, dragging out normally. So I'll cut in oftentimes as an angle, but most of the times if I'm building up shapes or forms or trying to get different styles out of stuff, I'm often going back and forth a few times because I just want to bring it up a little bit in an area, and then I'll hit it with a smooth really quick to kind of bring it back down. That's my main kind of sculpting process there. Now, another fun brush to add into the mix here. So I'm going to make some sort of alien creature here. Today we're only going to do this from a sphere only. We're not going to go into any advanced things like adding, multiple tools to your project, because this is basically what I kind of want to get you guys. If you're new to ZBrush, this is where I want you to go. Like, this is the first steps here. And if you get to this level and you're comfortable with it, then you can advance to the next series of stuff. But the main thing is just don't try to overdo, all the stuff inside of ZBrush and try to go gung-ho right out the gate, because it's really not needed. You can get a lot of stuff. There's excellent artists that only use a few tools inside of ZBrush and they come up with amazing things. And so it's just this kind of methodology of just going in and building up your shapes and forms and then changing your brushes to a few and going in and sculpting in and out. So one question we have is, if I'm using Sculptris Pro, we don't need to turn on Dynamesh. So you can use them both at the same time if you want. So Dynamesh lives in this geometry palette over here, and I'm not going to go into this much today. I'll just show you guys where it is because there was a question. So my model currently is in Dynamesh mode, and Dynamesh, if you have it active and you hold control and click off a model, basically doing that unmask process, it's going to re-Dynamesh your model. And what this is going to do, it's going to take the volume of your mesh and flood it with topology, and it's going to try to get even topology across everything. So if I have this model here and I drag off on a blank spot with the holding control and release, this is going to re-Dynamesh, and you're going to see this is what's going to happen. So it came through and it flooded the model with new topology, and now I should have even topology everywhere. So this is helpful if you want to take a base mesh and then get specific topology across everything. It's a great workflow for that. Now if I undo this and you see what the Sculptris version is, I recently been moving more towards Sculptris than using Dynamesh, because I can add detail only where I need it. And so if you have Dynamesh, it's going to flood the entire model with even topology, and that topology is going to be equal everywhere. If you come in with Sculptris Pro, you can add more detail just in specific areas, and then areas where you don't need the detail, you can leave them to be sparse. So you can see as I hold control and re-Dynamesh, you can see this area now has more tessellation, but I lost a lot of that tessellation in the eyes. Now you can increase your resolution to get this area to hold when you do that Dynamesh process. However, you must remember that it's doing it to everywhere on your model. So it's going to make your models a lot heavier because it has to fill the entire model with that same amount of resolution. So one little thing there with Dynamesh. And if you're not using Dynamesh, you can disable it just by turning it off over here in the Tool, Geometry, Dynamesh area. And now if you hold control and click off, doing that clear mask type function with no mask, you see it's not going to Dynamesh your model. So that's how you can disable it over there. So going back to my mesh here, I'm just going to start sculpting this a little bit more. The Claybuildup brush, go to as normal, and then I'll use the damn standard bunch as well. So BDS, the hotkey for that. I'm going to hold spacebar since I showed you guys how to do spacebar now. And I'm going to come in and start cutting in some lids here. Now, one thing with eyes and stuff, if you're only doing single subtool kind of sculpting, it's a lot easier to make a closed eye than it is to make an open eye. So even for an alien. So usually I use secondary subtools for any kind of eyeball processes. And just basically get a feeling for how the sculpture works. And so with Sculptris Pro, I don't have to worry about resolution, I don't have to worry about topology, I don't have to worry about subdivision. You just turn it on and then you can sculpt, and you can just sculpt what you want. And then come in and just generate the forms on your mesh. So it's really freeing, and the brushes inside of ZBrush all feel really well, especially if you have like a pen device. So I'm using a tablet here and just coming in and adding and subtracting these forms here. Now for cut-ins as well, I often recommend not trying to make straight marks, especially if you're doing aliens or creatures or anything like that, because wrinkles aren't straight. So just when you're doing that stuff, don't worry about it too much. So there's some quick little sculptural marks there. Let me check these questions here. So we have one question: can we combine Sculptris Pro with Polypaint to paint sharper and cleaner? Yes, you can. So you can use the Sculptris Pro with paint, and as you paint on the surface model, it will go through that. I'm gonna hit painting here in a little bit, and we'll go through that. He's a very sleepy alien. So if you're just starting out, we have a question on what I would recommend saving. So we talked about saving tools over here, and we talked about saving files over here. So I'd recommend saving ZPRs, which is the project files, which can be done through File, Save As, or coming up here and clicking this Quick Save button, which will save it into your Quick Save directory. That's what I recommend doing, especially if you're starting out, because that way, if you have or loaded in a different model, just getting used to the application and everything else, that's probably the best way to go, because then you don't have to worry about other elements. Now, if you start saving out tools, you're gonna have to remember to save out the tool each time. If you have multiple tools over here, you have to remember about saving each one of them. So when you do a save tool, it's only gonna save the one you have selected. So if I had another tool that I brought in through import, or maybe loaded in through lightbox, and I have it over here and I sculpted on for a little bit, and then I switched to another tool and sculpted on that one. If I go to save this tool, but then I don't save that tool, only this one's gonna get saved. So saving a project file is gonna be a lot safer for your initial usage of ZBrush, especially if you're just learning. Go ahead and just save project files. I know Paul, he only saves project files, so that's his kind of go-to there. So always end up saving project files, especially if you're starting out. So we have a question about Decimate being intended as a global controlled Sculptris pass. So the Decimate option, there's another option here in geometry and here called Decimate. And this will do that process I'm doing with Sculptris, except it's going to do it across everywhere. It will also respect masking. So if I have an area masked out, and I run this over here, it's gonna flood the model with topology and try to get a polygon size that's equal in the areas. Now, one thing different between Decimate and Dynamesh is that Dynamesh is gonna flood everything. So we talked about how it's gonna look at that, it's gonna, whatever resolution you have here, it's gonna give you a triangle size of that, and it's gonna flood the entire model. Now, when you Decimate, if you have a model that has more density than your polygon slider here, it's not going to add or remove to that unless you have both of these on. If you have Decimate on, then it'll end up removing. But basically, Decimate would allow me to come in and add just to areas that don't have enough resolution. So a little thing there with Decimate. And I don't really want to get into that too much today, because it does get in more of an advanced level in terms of just ZBrush usage. Now with this here, I want to switch to one more brush, and we talked about using the move brush, which will allow us to move the surfaces. But the move brush does not work with Sculptris Pro. So if I come in here and turn my polyframes on and perform a move, you can see I can move this, and it's going to allow me to move it. But as I move this out, you're seeing I'm going to be able to start stretching those polygons, right? So this is not what you want most of the time, right? So you may want to do a move, but you want it to actually add geometry like it was doing when I was sculpting. So the move will not work with Sculptris. Now you can get some really cool stuff using the move like this, and then coming back in with Sculptris, you get some nice artifacting they can then look at and kind of build shapes and designs off of. But move will not work with Sculptris Pro. So what we can do instead is we can use a brush called Snake Hook. And if I go to the brush palette again by hitting B on my keyboard, I can isolate by the letter S, and then I can hit H, which will give me the snake hook brush, which is this brush right here. Now what the snake hook brush is going to do, it's going to allow you to pull forms off your model, and as you pull them out with Sculptris Pro active, it's going to keep adding topology to it. And so this is really cool for coming in and say generating different horns. You know, maybe now my alien's got horns, maybe my alien needs a neck, right? So I can come to the bottom here and I can just pull this out, and I can keep pulling this and growing it. And if I have Sculptris Pro on, I can now come through and start generating, you know, really quick meshes out of nowhere. And all I did here was I just made sure I had Sculptris Pro active, and then I just selected the snake hook brush. So let's go back to Claybuildup, which is BCB. And now let's select the snake hook brush one more time. So B, S, H, and that'll give me the snake hook brush. Now once I have the hook brush active, you can see as I use this, depending on my draw size, if I drag out, it's going to add topology as I pull this out. So this one's really cool to come in and start playing with forms. And so basically you can see, using just a few brushes, Sculptris Pro, and I started this all from a sphere, you can start generating an entire mesh. If I want arms on this guy, I can come in, change a little smaller draw size here, start pulling these out. I can then come in and use an inflate brush, so B-I-N will give you the inflate brush, and I can actually inflate these a little bit and smooth these out as well. If I want to make random kind of erase marks, let's say I don't want his arms anymore. I decided, I did the arms, didn't really like it. I can always smooth these away, and if I have Sculptris Pro on and a large brush size, this is going to allow me to remove that as well. So I can actually come through and scrub out that entire thing. And then let's say I do a horn with Sculptris Pro, or the horn with Sculptris Pro and snake hook, right? So I do something like that, and then I decide I want it to kind of be floating off in space. I can hold shift again and just pick the middle area, and I can actually just scrub this away and break that out. So now I've got some sort of like weird looking Mew from Pokemon. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with the snake hook brush, and it's really excellent for base mesh building, for adding different parts to it, and it's very nice and easy to do. And none of this stuff is complex that I've gone through today. Like, I'm using very little hotkeys. Most of the times it's Control, Alt, or Shift. And then I've used 4 brushes, right? And then I'm just going in and pushing and pulling. And that's the basics of ZBrush. And with this, you can get, pretty much anything out of it. So there's a lot inside of ZBrush, but at the base of the application, it can be very simplified and really powerful. So I'm gonna go in and detail this guy a little bit more. So adding a little bit forms here. So we're gonna go and grab, say, the Claybuildup brush again. And I'll pull down, different things. So we can actually add these in there, and then maybe do something like that. And as I'm doing this, if I don't like any of it, I can always smooth it back out. And if I have a larger draw size with the default Sculptris Pro settings, this is gonna allow me to smooth those surfaces out. So I get them nice and kind of cleaner through there. And I can clean up this area through here. So all I'm doing right now is changing brush size and smoothing out stuff. Then I come in with the damn standard brush and start cutting in some stuff here. Now, one thing with the damn standard brush as well is by default, when you select it, you're going to see at the top here that if I go back to the Claybuildup brush, BCB, that this is set to Z add. And so what these options are doing up here is when I hold down Alt, it's basically switching from Z add to Z sub. So this is what the positive form is. So if I didn't hold down Alt and I sculpt, I get a positive form, right? And if I switch this to Z sub and I sculpt without holding Alt, you'll see it's going to cut in. So the Alt functionality is just switching between this adding and subtraction process at the top here. Now, most brushes inside of ZBrush are going to be set to Z add by default. So this means when you sculpt positively, it's going to add to the surface. So it's taking those points and pulling them towards your brush stroke, right? But the damn standard brush is set to Z sub. So this means when you use this brush, it's going to automatically be set to cut in. So you don't have to hold Alt with the damn standard brush by default to get it to cut in. But if you want to switch it to kind of get back to how all the other brushes we've been doing, where if you just click and drag, it sculpts in a positive form, and if you hold Alt, it sculpts in a negative form, you can just come up here and switch this to add. And now when you use the damn standard brush and you sculpt positively, it's going to now give you this kind of raised surface. And then now you can hold Alt to cut in. So I often switch my damn standard brush because I'm so used to just doing like inner carves on things. And so I'll use it in a more of a normal way, but by default, when you have the damn standard brush and you click and drag, it's going to cut in. And then if you hold Alt and click and drag, it's going to cut out. But this damn standard brush is a great one for adding nice kind of edge details too. So you can come through and add different little like skin bumps where like light will touch the other surface there. and get you some different designs out of it. And then you can also use masking. Masking is another huge friend for doing this kind of stuff. So I can mask out an area through here. Now masking will not add Sculptris Pro tessellation to your mesh. So if you're using masking, you'll see that I'm getting these triangle masking up here, but I'm getting clean mask down here. So if you want to use masking on a certain area, like this area through here, what I recommend doing is first coming through, and if you have Sculptris Pro enabled, just smooth that area out to add a little more tessellation. If I turn my polyframes on here, you can see as I'm smoothing, it's going to add that through there. And then now I can come back in, holding control, getting my mask brush, and now I can mask out that area. And it's going to give me a nice clean mask. And then now after I have that masked out, I can now come in with, say, my sculpting brush. I can sculpt around the outer edge here. And get something like that, and that's going to give me a little different design elements on my mesh. Look at these questions here. So we have questions about Z-remeshing. And so there's another process. We can actually apply new topology to your mesh, and that's called Z-remesher, and that lives in the tool palette geometry Z-remesh area here. And the question is asking about the differences in topology for using Dynamesh or Z-remesher, or even say the Decimate option we went into. So these are all just different ways to triangulate or topologize your model. Now, a lot of these times, the ways or when you want to use these depends on what your end goal is. If you're initially just sculpting in ZBrush, you don't really need to do any of that. You can just turn on Sculptris Pro and sculpt, and your mesh is going to give you tessellation where you need it. You'll be able to add those details in and then continue on. If you're doing game assets, or you want to start, breaking a mesh down into like a lower version of itself, so you can apply UVs, things like that, then you can use the Z-remesher, which will go through and apply new topology to your entire model. Then we talked about Decimate. We'll go through and just add topology to areas that don't have the topology. And then Dynamesh is going to go through and resurface or retopologize, giving you new topology across your entire mesh. So those are the base 3 different versions there. Now, depending on when you want to use it, it's really up to the artist itself. There isn't a right way or wrong way to use any of these processes. As a starting artist, and if you're just starting in ZBrush, I'd say don't even worry about those buttons over there. Just close this geometry tab for your first time sculpting, and then just turn on Sculptris Pro and just play with the mesh. Now, there is one thing with Sculptris Pro that you may hit, and so if you're coming in and sculpting, you may notice that at some point your mesh may start, your sculpting strokes may start feeling a little bit sluggish. And so if you're coming through and you start adding a stroke, it may not feel as fluid as it did initially when you started doing this. And this is because every time you make a stroke with Sculptris Pro, depending on your brush size, it could be adding or removing geometry. And if it's adding geometry and you're sculpting really finite details, your mesh is going to start to get pretty heavy. And so when you get up to around, say, on this machine, when I get usually up to around 500 to 750,000 points for a sculpt, my brush start will start to not feel as well as it did. Now, there's 2 things you can do at this point. First, you can come up here and just turn off Sculptris Pro. And this is going to disable that option where it's going to automatically add the geometry to your mesh as you sculpt. But you can still sculpt on your model, especially if you already have details done in the area. So like this area here, I already have a bunch of topology through here because I've already been going through and using Sculptris Pro. So if I turn Sculptris Pro off, I can now just sculpt normally. So I'm just sculpting now on the existing topology. But since I've already added a bunch of topology in that area, I don't need to really add any more. It's already there. So now I can just use standard sculpting, and this is going to give me back that really smooth brush control again, because now ZBrush is no longer going, hey, I need to add this topology to this area. Now it's just going back to the normal sculpting process, was if I just took that sphere originally. So you can turn off Sculptris Pro if you start getting heavy, and then just come in and continue sculpting. That is one process you can do there to kind of go through and speed up your sculpting if you start noticing that your machine's getting a little taxed. Now, the other option that I recommend when using Sculptris Pro is to use a process called Decimation. And what Decimation does, it's an actual plugin that lives up here in the Z plugin tab, and we have a plugin called Decimation Master. And what Decimation Master does, it's going to analyze the entire mesh. So it's looking at the entire surface of it, and it's looking at the sculptural details. So anywhere you have, points that are describing forms on your model, and it's analyzing these details. And then what it's going to do, it's going to go through your mesh and look and see if there's any areas where you don't need triangles to hold those details. So if you say have a box, right, and you have the top of that box and it's super tessellated, right, tons of geometry, really heavy, and then you go through and you run this decimation process. Since that is a flat surface, in order to describe that form, you don't need all that triangulation. You don't need all those triangles, you don't need all those polygons. It's just a flat surface. And all you need to do to describe a flat surface, if it's like a square, is basically 1, 2, 3, 4 vertices, and then a set of edges going down between. So it's 2 triangles. So Decimation Master is going to go through and it's going to look at the sculptural details and it's going to go, hey, I don't need all these triangles to give you that form. And it's going to reduce it. Okay, so it's going to remove any triangulation you don't need. And when you're starting out, you have a bunch of stuff here that you can go through and click on, but you don't need to mess with any of this either. What I recommend doing, and I do myself, is I just come down here to the bottom and there's a preset section. And in here you have 20K, 35K, 75K, 150K, and 250K. And I usually end up all the time, I just click 75K. This is going to take your model down to 75,000 points, and it's going to retain that detail that you had. And this is going to lighten the entire model up, but still give you all the details you had. And then now you can use Sculptris Pro again, and it's going to go back to being fluid. So with this model here, I'm going to come over and click that 75. This is just going to process this mesh. And depending on how many polygons you have, if you're up to like millions and millions of polygons on a model, it could take a little while, but most of the times the decimation process is so quick, like it already did it for that one. And I just want to hit Control Z to just go back and forth between this. So you can see my active point count up here, so 75,000. So this is the decimated version. Now let's hit Control Z. This was the high version I had at 286. Did you see much change? Let's do it again. Control Shift Z. There's 75. There's 286. 75. 286. You can't tell a difference. And if I turn on my polyframes here, you can see what it's doing. So this is before decimation, and then that's after decimation. So the decimation process just went through. It was like, hey, I don't need this there. You're still going to get that same stroke. Let's just remove that. Let's reduce that down. And that is what it's doing across your entire mesh. Now I'm back to pretty much the exact same thing I had, but my model is significantly less polygons. And the Decimation Master process is used everywhere in terms of 3D printing. It's also used for baking stuff out. So if you have a model that's like 80 million polygons, you can decimate it down to say 5 million or 2 million probably. Still contain all those details. You can dump that out, bake maps with that, all sorts of stuff. So it's really, really handy to use. And with Sculptris Pro, it goes hand in hand. It's basically, if you're using Sculptris Pro, Decimation Master is right there with it. And so now that I've decimated this model down, I can now go back in and then just continue sculpting again, right? And I can come in and add, more details to this area here, cut some stuff out, and just play with it, right? Now, one thing with decimation, it will work with poly painting, and it does have an option that will allow you to hold the poly paint information, but it's not going to be probably your best bet most of the time, because if you have color on your model and the color has a lot of detail, you're going to need a lot of polygons to go through and hold that detail there. But for sculptural stuff, it works, pretty much flawlessly. So I'll use it to a point where I'll come through and, sculpt until I'm happy with a mesh, and then I'll end up painting at the very end. So that's what I do in terms of the poly painting stuff. Now for this area through here, I'm just going to smooth some of this out, just holding shift and just lightly smoothing. And this is basically what I want, you guys to do with this. And definitely, if you guys are following along on any of these, we have a hashtag, ZBrush at home, and I'd love to see what you guys have been doing with ZBrush. So if you use that hashtag and post it on Twitter there, love to see what you guys have. Yeah, so we have a question here, triangles and quads. does it matter? And we only need quads for games. So when you have a video game, you may model that entire mesh in quads, but when it reaches a game engine, it's all triangles. And so basically the quads are usually set up for animation purposes. It's a lot easier to animate with a quad mesh than it is to animate with a triangulated one. But in terms of your surface, so 3D printing doesn't care about quads or triangles, and you may be sending that model to the game engine, but when it reaches the actual rendering engine on the game engine, it's usually always being converted to triangles. And so your model is going to get to triangles anyway, but it's easier to manipulate quads for sure, especially if you're doing poly modeling and other things like that. And we have, ZBrush has a poly modeling brush that's called the Z Modeler brush that will allow you to come through and model topology as well. You can also edit your meshes. And so you can see as you can come through and start smoothing this out. Now it may get to a point with the default Sculptris Pro brush where the smooth may not be smoothing as much as you like. And with this, there's some different brushes you can load in as well. And so we've been going through this brush menu over here by hitting B on our keyboard here, which opens these up. And these are the brushes that are shipping with ZBrush here. So these are shipping with ZBrush and then they're loaded automatically. But there's also a whole bunch of brushes that come with ZBrush that aren't loaded automatically. And these live in Lightbox. So this is the same place in Lightbox where we're accessing our initial models that we started sculpting on. So to get to these, what we can do is I'm going to open up Lightbox here, do a little quick saving. So move this over here so I can open the Lightbox. And in Lightbox here, you can see we have our project folder. This is where we started with our sphere object. We have our quick save folder, so you can see it's saving my files. So I just did a quick save up here by clicking this, took it and saved it into the folder here. And then we also have our brush folder here, and this contains some brushes that aren't loaded by default. Now I was talking about the smoothing brush because basically for the smoothing stuff, if you have a lot of topology, your smoothing algorithm is, it may feel like it's not smoothing enough. So as you saw when I was manipulating around his chest here, I still had I still have a little bit of lumpy forms through here where I was coming in and using that, Claybuildup brush in that area, but I want to smooth it out. And so I could smooth it out by increasing my draw size really big with the Sculptris Pro option, and then would shrink it there, remove the topology and smooth it down that way. But that was still not being, as fast as I wanted to be. So in the brush area here of Lightbox, there is a folder that is called Smooth. And I can come over here and open this up. And in here, we have a bunch of other brushes that are smoothing brushes. And the one brush that I'll use oftentimes is this Smooth Stronger brush. And so I can come across this and now double click. And this is going to give you a little pop-up that's telling you, hey, you're using a normal smooth brush, but now you're going to use this instead. Is that okay? And so by all means, yes, I want the Smooth Stronger. And so now with Smooth Stronger, what I can do is now when I smooth, it's going to make this a little bit stronger across the model. So as I smooth, it's going to make, that smoothness, happen a lot faster. And so if you have areas on your mesh and you're finding that, hey, this is not going as fast as I want it to go, you can now switch to the Smooth Stronger brush and kind of go through and use that instead. Now at the beginning, this is a good tangent time here, we had a question that was asking the brush locations of stuff inside of ZBrush and how to get them and where are they at. So the brushes in Lightbox, if I open this up, you can see where these live by going to the folder. So if I go to the brush folder here and then say I go back into that smooth area here, if you hover over anything inside a Lightbox, it's going to tell you the path down here. So the ones that live in the brush folder here inside a Lightbox are located in your program files if you're on Windows. If you're on OS X, it's going to be your application directory. And then in the ZBrush 2020.1.1 folder. And then there's going to be a ZBrushes folder. And then in there we have smooth and then smooth variants, or the smooth brushes I just selected. So ZBrushes smooth is the folder here. So this brush palette here is located in ZBrushes. So that's where all these folders are living. So your ZBrush 2020/ZBrushes directory. And all these lightbox brushes are in there. Now the brushes that ship with ZBrush, they're located in a different directory. So I'm just gonna show you guys how to get there quick through lightbox. I'm gonna hit brush here, go there, I'm in the ZBrushes folder. I'm gonna go up one directory here, and you can see now I'm in the ZBrush 2020 directory. In here, I wanna locate the Z Startup folder, and open that up. And then in Z Startup, there is a brush presets folder, and I want to open that up. Now this location is ZBrush 2020 Z Startup brush presets. Now any brushes, you can take the brushes from that other folder I just showed you guys and copy them into here if you want to. Any brushes that are in this brush presets folder are gonna be loaded into this area on ZBrush Launch. Now you'll notice when I'm in this folder right now, this folder does not contain any extra brushes, so it's pretty much blank through here. And this is set up so that you have this area where you can copy your own brushes and you're not gonna mess up the ones that are in here. So these brushes here live in another folder that's not Z Startup, but Z Data. And so I'd recommend, especially if you're new to ZBrush, don't go messing with the Z Data folder. But if you wanna know where to copy brush presets, or say you found a brush online that you want to download and try in your version of ZBrush, just save that file out. It'll be saved as a ZBP file, so a ZBrush file there. Take that file and copy it to your ZBrush 2020.1.1/ZStartup/brush presets folder, and then put it right in there. And then next time you launch ZBrush, that brush will now show up at the bottom here. And then you can use custom brushes like that. And then if you just want to throw it in the lightbox as well, any of those brushes live in lightbox here. You can just have it, just save it in the lightbox folder too, which is that ZBrushes directory. And then you can come through and load those too. So hope that gives that information for you guys there. And I think I should have an Ask ZBrush on that too. If not, I will take note of that and I will make one for you this week if that one does not exist. So the Ask ZBrush system is a series of videos that I'll do weekly, and we're up to hundreds of those. And you'll go through and basically if you have any questions, you can submit questions on Twitter, and I try to go through. And if there are possible to be answered, and I can answer them in a timely amount of time, I'll go through and answer those questions and put a video up on YouTube, and then you can just go and watch the video. So if you search anything like Ask ZBrush, like brush locations, I'm pretty sure I have one done for that. But if not, I'll go through and try to get one this week. So let me look at these questions here quick, and then we'll cover some painting stuff. So Kyle is asking, he wants to know if there's a way he can pose a model, like pose his model at the end. So this stuff will come into play. It is a little bit advanced for what I want to cover in this session. But basically, we were talking about earlier the different ways to remesh a model. The main one here, the Z-remesher one down here, you can go through and actually use this on a model and it'll re-topologize the entire mesh. Here we can see what it's going to do for this, just to give you guys a little preview here. Now, if it's first time using ZBrush, I wouldn't go crazy about this. Just focus on sculpting, focus on getting a feel for the brushes. All this other stuff will come into play after you kind of get that basic form down. So here's what the Z-mesh will do. We'll see what it does with this mesh here. And so that is the result of the Z-mesh on that. So it took the model and it generated entirely new topology for that. Now, Kyle was asking, posing in relation to stuff. So say I sculpt this model and then I wanted to pose them later. So the quick process, I'm not going to go through the thing, but if you want to kind of search some stuff on it, I can give you some little keywords here. So basically the process would involve, you'd have your sculptural model, the one you've done with Sculptris Pro with all the details. You duplicate that model in the subtool directory, and that would create a clone of that model. Then after you have two of those, you take the one, and then you run it with Z-remesher. And that'll take that mesh, one of the duplicated one, and give you topology like this. After you have topology like this is going to be a lot easier to pose and move around. So you can actually go through and, you know, mask off geometry and use the Gizmo 3D to move it, position it where you want it. But before you do any of that, this mesh contains none of your high-res details. So what you want to do is you want to take the ZRemeshed version of your model. You then would want to divide this up. And I'm not going to cover this in this session, but you divide it up, which will then subdivide your model. And this gives you this now as your low resolution, and then you can have a bunch of subdivisions, and then you can now project the details from your high to your low, and then you'll have a low resolution version that you can pose, and then when you scroll back up, it'll contain all those high-res details. So that is the quick rundown. I'll take note for another session, because basically this whole session today I wanted to just be on the very basics, and I didn't want to get anything too crazy. But definitely there is a way to go through that, and the ZRemesher duplication process, and then projecting your details back with the subtool project option through here will allow you to project your high resolution details back to that mesh, and then you can put that mesh all the way back down to low resolution, pose it, and then go back up, and those details will still be there. So I'll make a note for future ZClassroom live sessions. Grim T Reaper is asking about measuring mesh thickness for printing. So I have a plugin for that. If you grab the Dynamesh Master plugin, there's an option in there for setting mesh thickness by millimeter. So you can just run that and it'll give you the millimeter thickness. For Jupiter, Webster's asking, can we use decimation process even if you don't use Sculptris Pro? By all means, if you can use decimation on any model, it will remove your subdivisions. So I just talked about using the geometry, dividing a mesh up. So decimation will remove that. But you can decimate any mesh. You can bring in any model you want and decimate it. Fabio is asking about hair cards. So it is possible to create hair cards. Do a search for Ask ZBrush hair cards. I think I have 2 videos on that you can watch, and hopefully that'll help. And also, I think I have them generating with UVs. There's a little process for it, but just do a search for hair and Ask ZBrush. I think there's a video. S7's asking about subtool layers. So there is a layer system here. You can use this as well. If you're a beginner, I'd probably stay away from these because there's different things inside here that can kind of be confusing. One thing with the layers is you want to think of them as morph targets. So you won't be able to use layers with Sculptris Pro because Sculptris Pro is going to change the geometry as you're sculpting on your model. So beginner, I'd stay away from layers. The layers, just think of them as morphs. So what a morph is if you have a vertice in one point and a vertice in another, you can actually shift the position and it'll morph between the 2 vertices. But in order for that process to work, the vertex count for your entire model has to be the same. And so the layers is just using that process where you can have a layer and another layer, and it's going to be able to calculate the differences between those points, and then you'll be able to blend between them and do things like that. But with Sculptris Pro, it's going to come through and change your topology, so the morph targets aren't going to work, so no layers. No layers for you, morph target. So Pedro is asking if we've thought about creating a keyboard preview where you can see all the hotkeys and know where they're available. If you want to create one, definitely create it and post it on ZBrush Central. I think it'd be kind of cool. I use a handful of keyboard shortcuts. I know we have text versions of it. You can go to the help option up here and go to the online docs and search for the keyboard layout, or hotkeys is probably the terminology you want to use. And there's a list of all of them there. But no, I don't think we have any that exist that's an actual keyboard preview, like where you'd have a keyboard and see all the little icons here with the hotkeys on it. But if you would like to make one and post it on ZBrush Central, I'm sure the community would love it. So question about after the basics. So exercises, I'd say to get started. So we have a question about after doing the basic stuff, what should I do? Well, that's, the basics will allow you to get different things. Just start sculpting different things. Like if you want to study anatomy stuff, open up a book of anatomy and just start sculpting. You want to get the feel for how the brushes work, how the brushes control, moving things around, getting that sense of your object in 3D. Now, if you've been doing it a lot, oftentimes, if you've been doing it traditionally for ages, it's probably going to come, pretty easy to you. But if you're coming from, say, like a 2D standpoint, you may have like a little kind of kind of learning crutch on that a little bit. So definitely don't rush it. I'd say, the more practice you do for sculpting stuff, even just on a daily level, 15 minutes here and there is definitely going to improve your overall quality of your work. And one thing I can't highly recommend enough, especially if you're just starting out, is just take 15 minutes and sculpt something every day. And you can go back, you don't have to spend a lot of time. It's just 15 minutes. And oftentimes you'll see that once you start doing something for 15 minutes, that you're going to lose track of time. It may end up being 2 hours later. And so it's just getting into doing it. So if you want to learn ZBrush and you want to get, fluent at it, it's just doing it. That's all it is. There's nothing other, trickery or anything to it. It's just doing it. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And that's with everything. So I recommend, if you're trying to learn the application, just spend 15 minutes at least once a day and just mess with it. And if you have the trial, you've got 30 days. So that's a lot of time in there to go through and start sculpting stuff. And then what I recommend doing is, after you've done this, I'm going to show you guys how to save screenshots out. Take a look at what you've done from, your first day of using ZBrush to like your 10th day, and you're going to see that increase of quality. And don't be afraid to redo stuff. That's the other kind of main word of advice I can give to anything inside of ZBrush is, don't be afraid to redo, because if you redo it, you're going to do it better the second time. Like, I can guarantee that if I wanted to redo this alien, the second version of this guy is going to be so much better than this one I just did. So it's just how it works all the time. And every time you do something, redoing it, you remember what you already did. So like, oh, I did it this way and it worked really well. And then now you've harnessed that. The next time you do it, you're going to do it better. So definitely, those are the exercises that I recommend for that. Let's see what else I got here. So masking is only going to be, we have a Fox is asking, is there a way to get masking more visible? So one thing with masking, it's going to be determined, basically it's always going to end up as this tonal value to it. The main thing you can do to make the clarity a little bit stronger is change the material that your model has. And so we haven't gone into materials at all today, but they live in this little option over here. And basically a material is just taking your model and it's applying this, most of the time, a spherical coloring to your mesh. And so we have a set of materials in here called matte caps, which live up here. And the most common ones you'll see are this matte cap red wax and this matte cap gray. And so all the default projects that you'll load in ZBrush most of the time will have this matte cap gray. And then you'll see there's a whole group of people that really love this matte cap red wax. I don't know why. But it does show details really well. So if you're doing like CNC carvings or stuff like that, switching to this brush, this material will definitely give you a different look. And you'll notice as you switch to this, just by default, like if I just start from the sphere, you see it's going to change the coloring of my model. So my model is still, doesn't have this color isn't really perceived in the vertices of it yet, or in the mesh itself. It's just this material driving it. So if I change to say these different materials here, you see I'm going to see that mesh now in these different areas. And for masking, if you want to see it better, I'd recommend switching to something like the Skin Shade 4. And this is going to make your model a lot more vibrant. And also for painting and stuff, I'd often recommend switching to Skin Shade 4 too. And this way, when you do that mask, you're going to see that show up a lot cleaner on your mesh. So it's sometimes, if it's harder to see when you're in a different material, switch to a different one and then see if that mask's a little bit easier to read. Now the masking also is going to be related, the clarity of it is going to be related to how many vertices or how many polygons are in that mesh in that area. So it's coming across and coloring all the different vertices. And so you can see this area through here, I'm getting a nice kind of clean border. But if I come up here and mask, you can see those edges right through here. I'm not going to get as much clarity as I did through here. And that's just because I don't have enough topology to really support that mask. So if your model's really low res and you go to mask, you may not be able to see it as well. So another thing there in terms of seeing it. So masking options there and materials. Let's see what here. So Montana's asking, when I use Decimation Master, it's only allowing a 2mm minimum thickness. So the Decimation Master will look, we're talking about a plugin and generating thickness based on a model for 3D printing. So the plugin itself is going to use the values inside the Dynamesh resolution, and your model just may have reached its pinnacle in terms of size that it can actually get. So try changing your model size some and see if you can get a different value. If it's still not working, then come up here to this Z plugin tab, or this help area up here, and do me a favor and submit a ticket to support, and we'll get you checked out in Montana. You can say I told you to submit a support ticket, and they'll send it to me most of the time. Let's see what else here. So Jimmy's asking the difference between smart resym and resymmetry and smart resym. So this is just another thing. We're going tangent stuff here, but I really need to get back to coloring and then rendering quick. So there's options for symmetry in here. So smart resym is going to analyze the mess. Resym is just going to do it based on your angle right down the middle. So this one's actually looking at geometry and trying to figure it out. And then this one's just not as smart. So the difference is there. There's an Ask ZBrush video on the Smart Resym too. You can go look at that. But basically resym is just going to try to resymmetric the mesh. And if it's going to do it always, not as well as Smart Resym. So try Smart Resym. It's going to make you happier. Let's see what here. So Scorpion's asking, can you add other models through masking like clothes or hair or whatever? Yes, you can. There is an extraction process. Quick hit on that is basically you can apply a mask to your model, and then in the subtool palette here, there is an extract option. And this will go through and look at that masking, and then you can set a thickness value here, and this will actually extract that mask to a new piece of geometry. So if I want to give my alien eyebrows here, come and click extract, and you can see now he has eyebrows. I'm not going to get too much in depth of that because basically you can extract it. There's a bunch of different values and stuff you can change over here. But that's the basic principle. So Scorpion, check out the subtool extract area down here, apply a mask, and then press extract. It'll give you a preview, and then press accept. Try that out and see if it works for you. All right, so now that we've talked briefly on materials, you can come over here and select your materials here. Another material that's often used is the basic material. So this is another one that is one of the main go-tos. This one is not a matte cap material. So what this means is that it does not contain lighting information. So you can load this on your model and you're gonna get kind of this shaded effect. And one thing nice about this, let me move my keyboard down here, is you can come to the light area here, and if I adjust the light, you'll see it's going to update on the mesh. So this is handy if you want to get different perspective on your models as you're working. And this is just the basic material. Now you'll notice if I switch back to that matte cap gray, I'm not going to see that lighting. Okay, so that's a difference between these materials that live up here, and then there's these materials down at the bottom down here. So these are basic materials, and these are going to respond to the lighting information that's in that light palette. And then the ones up here, which are your matte cap materials, are going to have that material coloring or that lighting built in. So two differences there and there. So you can switch to, say, the basic material, and then now you can go to the light area. And then you can move the light around, and you'll see it update on your model in real time. So that's another little thing there if you're trying to mess with some lighting stuff and you want to see your model in some different lighting environments there. So I'm going to switch back to the Skin Shade 4 because I want to briefly hit on coloring and then finish out with how to get a texture out of here. So, or not texture, a render, so you can share what you've sculpted in the ZBrush at home hashtag that you guys are all going to use on Twitter. So when you're starting ZBrush, there's multiple ways you can texture a model. And the easiest way is just using poly painting. And what poly painting is that it's going to allow you to take a color and you're going to be able to insert that color onto a vertice of your mesh. So that's those little points that are all over the mesh. Now, the more vertices you have, the stronger the color blend, the more clarity you're going to get. But that's the basic principle. And so we're going to take color and we're going to put it into the vertices. So the first thing we need to do for this is we need to tell our model, hey, let me accept color. And to do this, we can go to our tool palette over here. Make sure we have our subtool here selected. And then I'm going to come down to the poly paint area and open this up. And in here, I want to activate colorize. Now, if you started from a sphere, like we did at the beginning of this, when you turn this on, your mesh is now going to be flooded with white. So it's basically flooding all the vertices with white. So this mesh is now entirely filled with white. Now, what I can do is I can select another brush, which is the paint brush, which is set up to allow you to paint. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard to go in the brush palette. Let me move this up so you guys can see this. And then I'm going to hit P, which is going to isolate by the letter P. And then down here you can see I have paint, which is assigned the hotkey A. So BPA is going to allow me to select that paintbrush. Now the paintbrush is going to come in, and you're going to see at the top here that the Z add and Z sub have been turned off. And so what this means is when I go and sculpt on my model, I'm not going to get any sculptural detail. It's ignoring the addition or the adding, moving of those vertices on the mesh, and it's ignoring the cutting or subtracting of the vertices on those mesh. And it's only going to apply red, green, or blue values to those vertices. Now you'll notice next to this we have an M RGB, and if you're starting out, the M stands for material, which is what these are over here. So you can actually bake in a material plus red, green, and blue. But if you're just starting out inside of ZBrush, I'd recommend not baking in material. It's going to give you a little more control just to have, you know, the option to come over here and switch to a different material if you want. And just make sure this is on this RGB value here. Now with the RGB value selected, I can now come over here and I can just select any color. So I can use this little color option here. You have some expanded color picker options as well. So if I come into color, move my keyboard here. And here we have a large color value here. We also have all these different color ones you can actually come through and mess with as well. And then we also have a plugin that's called ZColor, and they can use this too. And if you click this, this is going to open up this little color wheel and a bunch of color pickers here. And you can use this to select your colors, do different hues and things, and then send that to ZBrush. So you have multiple ways you can pick your colors inside. You can also type them in as well. So there's type in values in this color area. So I'm just going to pick a little off bluish color here. Now to paint with color on your model, it's the exact same thing we were doing for sculpting. Just come across and click and drag. This is going to work on pressure sensitivity too. So if I press really hard on my pen tablet, you see I'm going to get a kind of really opaque paint. And then if I come in really soft, I'm going to get a soft coloring. So you can come in and just do this on your mesh, and you can come in and paint any areas like so. You can change your draw size and apply. You may want to turn Sculptris off if you don't want to affect the topology there. So we asked earlier, we had a question about Sculptris Pro working with paint, and you can see that yes, it will. So if I have a small draw size and this and paint only, you can see as I paint, it's going to also tessellate that model, and I'm going to get a clear stroke. But if you've done a lot of sculpting and you just want to apply like a gradient kind of hue to it, I'd probably recommend turning Sculptris off, and then now you can come in and paint, and this will apply colors to your mesh there. Now another thing that's handy with the painting option inside of ZBrush is that you can use alphas with this as well, and this will give you this kind of gradient paint effect, and I use this quite a bit when I paint stuff. I like the sculpting aspect more than the painting, so I'll go through and sculpt stuff, and then the painting sometimes will get done, but not always. And for with this, what I usually end up doing for painting is I'll use alphas along with my painting. And so I'll use something like this gradient kind of ramp here. That's basically just a white to black kind of ramp. Now black values inside of ZBrush will render translucent if you load them in as an alpha map. So all these here, you can see where there is black values, it's going to render as this kind of a translucent effect. So I'm going to select this one here, which is at alpha 27, and I'm going to go to stroke here. Let me move my, I'm going to live over here for a little bit. I'll go to the stroke here, and I'm going to choose drag rectangle. Now drag rectangle is going to give me a different stroke for my paintbrush. So currently I was in dots, and so when I use this with this brush, it's going to apply, and it's going to take the alpha, but I'm not getting this kind of global drag that I want. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change my stroke to drag rectangle, and with this gradient value and this color, I'll do a little different color here. And if I click and drag, this is now going to apply that, and it's going to apply it with the alpha. And you can see I can drag this out. Now another thing when doing this, you have this little alpha option up here that you can turn on and off. This is going to determine how this alpha is going to be applied as well with that alpha. So you can just kind of tailor this and you'll see it give you different variations to it. So now I can come in and just kind of use this to add a little bit more blending to it. You can change your focal shift as well, which will give you, a stronger ramp. So you can see as I change that focal shift, I'm now not getting a circular drag out on the mesh. So as an example, if I come in and click and drag, you can see I'm getting it more square. But when I had it back at 0, I was getting this fall off. So I was getting this kind of soft effect. So if you want your alpha to show up more, you can definitely change that out. And when you do this, whichever way you drag is going to allow you to kind of control how that blending is going to happen. So you can see that's a pretty good gradient there I'm kind of looking for. And I can use this, pretty much anywhere in my model and go through and apply this kind of nice color effect. Now I have symmetry active, so you can see as I'm doing this, I'm getting a symmetrical line down the middle as well. So if you don't want that, you can disable symmetry too, and that can be done in the transform palette. And there's a activate symmetry button, and you have an X, Y, and Z. You can also just press X on your keyboard, and that will toggle symmetry on and off. So if I want to come through and say, use this alpha, but not have it affect the other side, I can turn off that symmetry, and now it's only going to affect one side. So you can come through and start adding different coloring effects to your mesh. Now we have a question asking, is it better to sculpt with perspective on or off? This is all up to you. So it just depends. Oftentimes the perspective you see inside of ZBrush is definitely going to be a computer generated perspective. And this is everything for movies, films, games. Like it's not a true perspective, it's always faked, right? So you can change this by going to your document palette, or not your document palette, your draw area. Keyboard's all over the place. There we go. Your draw palette. And in here we have some different camera options. And you can set these, and these are going to change your camera angles. So you can come through and change these to get different perspective values on it. You can also just come over here and disable perspective, which will go into orthographic or perspective view. And I usually end up, it's about 50-50 what I'll work on. If I'm doing kind of toy stuff or things like that, oftentimes I'll keep it more in orthographic than in perspective, because this gives you a little bit truer kind of version of the model, especially when you're looking at it from left, right, and all angles. So it just really depends on artists, what you want to do. If you're matching a photo and you know the perspective angle, you can definitely come up here and set that angle up here and then match based on that photo imagery. But it just depends on the artist. So I sometimes have it on, sometimes have it off. It's just whatever the day feels like. That's what we go through. So we have a question about the decimation plugin. After not decimating after live Boolean or using different polygroups. So for that, I would say that make sure you don't have a lot of geometry that's causing like crazy stuff. So if you use live Booleans, you have the possibility to come through and have a lot of distortion in certain areas because you're working with very long triangles. And so you may just have a mesh that has some geometrical errors somewhere, and that's ending up causing the problem when you try to actually decimate it down. So what I recommend is just you can go to geometry and then go to modify topology and then mesh integrity, and there's this check mesh integrity button. And this will look at your mesh, and if it throws up a bunch of errors, you've got problems somewhere on your mesh, which is causing that. But when you're using live Booleans, you can also after it's done, you can use ZBrush to reprocess it. You can also use Dynamesh afterwards, and that will clean up some of that stuff too. So if it's having an issue when you try to decimate something, use this mesh and check integrity and see if you have any vertices that are, causing things like this or weird things happening. The decimation process may not be able to handle. So let's see here. Oh, that's someone else's answer. So there's a question asking about storing your draw size. So I'll come up here and I'll do this quite a bit, and I'm changing my sizes. This will save with your brush. So this is a little higher, higher than what I was wanting to get into for today, but we'll go ahead and talk about it. So let's say I have this brush and my paintbrush, and this is the one, I kind of want to use this one, and I want to make some of these little dots. So I'll come through and add like this dot effect, and I want to save this out. And I want to make sure that it goes with this draw size of 54. That's the one I like for this model. So this stuff, like the draw size and the alpha and the stroke, this will all save with the brush. So if you have a setting that you want to stay with that brush, just come up here and save it. You can save it as a brush file. You can replace these brushes. These are located in that Z data folder we were talking about. And you can actually replace and overwrite those. And then next time you load that brush, this draw size will be remembered. There's also this option here that will remember the draw size of your brush too. And so you can toggle this on, and as you're working inside a ZBrush, this draw size will be remembered per brush rather than each brush. So that's another thing there. And then this draw size will save when you go to brush, save as. So one thing there with the brush stuff for storing a draw size. All right, so now let's say I've got some painting done here, because we're getting close to the end here. And let's say I want to render this out. So there's a few processes you can do here for rendering. So you have, this is a preview render is what this is called. And basically that means that it's just what ZBrush is showing in preview mode. Now, if I come up here to the top and I go to render, you'll see here that this is our render palette. And in here you can see its preview mode is active. So this is going to be your common, like I'm just inside of ZBrush, I'm using ZBrush, I'm just getting it in preview mode. Now, there is another thing in here that's called best, and you can do a best render. And if you click this, it's going to do a screen space render. And what this is going to do, it's going to basically drop your model to the canvas and then render the entire thing. So here's preview. And then if I want to do a best render, and turn on best, you'll see this is going to process. And now I'm getting this. So that's second option. So you got preview and best. And then the third option is BPR. So if I come up here to BPR, what this is going to do is a best render preview, or best preview render. And this is going to come through and it's going to apply a bunch of different rendering stuff on your model here. And so if I come across and render this, you can see now I'm getting these shadows. If I have this floor grid turned on and render again, you're going to see I'm going to get shadowing on the floor as well. And then this will also be looking at our lights. So I can come and move this a little bit and then re-render and change that as well. So for the rendering processes, the key ones you have, especially if you're starting off, is preview. And then we can go to render best, which is going to give us this kind of effect. So it's like an AO type rendering. And then we have BPR. Now, after you have a render that you like, to quickly get this out, I'll cover here another step that you can use with rendering with BPR here in a second, but I want to get this done so I don't run out of time. Is after you have your render and you like it to your liking and you want to post it up on Twitter with that ZBrush at home hashtag, just come up here to the document palette, and I'm going to move my keyboard here. I'm going to live there now. And in the document palette, we have some different options here. So we talked about this open and save as. Just going to stay away from those. Don't go near them. Just pretend like they're not there. What we want is this export image option or this export screen grab. Now, if you click export image, this is going to allow you to just save out what you see in ZBrush here in the canvas space. So it's only going to take this area through here. Now, if you go to document and you click export screen grab, this is going to take the entire ZBrush interface. So if you want to show that you did this model in ZBrush, you can export out the screen grab. If you just want to show the model itself on the canvas, just click this export image. Now, when you click this, whatever you're currently seeing is what it's going to get exported out. So if I was in preview mode like this, and I go to document export, it's going to give me this. If I rendered in best and had it in best mode, and then went to document and export, it's going to give me that best. And then if I render with BPR, and I go to document export, it's now going to give me the BPR. Now, when you click export here, this is going to open up your little dialog here. And in here, you can save as a few different file formats. So we have JPEG, PNG, bitmap, and TIFF. Now, if you select something like JPEG and click save, this is going to give you this little window here. And in this window, you can actually crop the image. So if you don't want all this blank space, you can actually drag, there's these little circles here, and you can drag these around and you can reframe your image. So I can come through and say, maybe I want his shadow like that, something like that. And after you're happy with this, there's a little, let's see, let's get the title. There we go. Oh, you guys can't see it. Then at the bottom here, there'll be an OK button. So just imagine way down here, there's OK. And when you click OK, that's now gonna save that JPEG out. And then you can now take that JPEG image, post it up online, show your friends, show your family, put it on the refrigerator, whatever you wanna do with it. And there you go. Now with the lighting stuff, if you wanna add more lights and say do different things with the rendering, I'll show you quick little things of that. So first, in the light palette, if you want to add a secondary light, you can come up here and just click on one of these icons, and these are going to activate another light. And some of these are going to be already set up to different positions. So as you click on these, you can see this little dot or pip that's going on in the sphere here. These are the lights that are kind of getting generated around it, right? And so I can come and say I want this one here, and if I click it again, it's going to turn it on, and you're going to see it's going to update. Now, if I'm in that material, like that basic material, I'm able to see this a little bit better with the lights. So you can see as I turn this off, it's going to be a little bit easier to see. And with this, you can take this and now drag it around. Now to get this behind, you want to hold Control. I think it's Control. Paul's the one that I usually have end up doing all the lighting stuff here. And this will give you that kind of back lighting information. So basically it'll allow you to put it in the back. And then you can increase the ambient on this if you want. But you're gonna get, you can get a decent rim light out of the process using BPR. And you can also add different lights and stuff. There's a whole advanced section you can do with light caps and backgrounds and everything else to get a material lighting on the back. So there's a lot of different things you can do with that. Now, one final thing I kind of want to hit on with the BPR rendering system is in Lightbox, if I open this up again, there's a whole set of these render sets. And in this render sets and filters, you can see there's a whole bunch of these different things that allow you to give different attributes to your model. So let's say I've just sculpted this mesh here, but now I want to go through and say maybe make it look like it's 2D or like some watercolor painting or something, right? So I can just open up Lightbox, navigate to the filters area, and then in here I can just double click one of these. Now if you don't want this to always be loaded, what I'd recommend doing now is probably doing that quick save first so you can get back to this file before you go through and change your filters. So just do that quick save out. After your quick save, now you come in and just double click these. And this is going to go through, and now you're going to get different effects on your meshes. Now, some of these, you can come through and make this a little smaller here. And you just double click these and you just kind of can see what they look like. Now you want to make sure that you have rendered with BPR to get this to kind of work. But you can see just by going through and just changing these, I'm now getting different effects for that render, right? So that one's looking pretty cool. So now I've got this going on. And so I can reposition my model, click this BPR again, and now I got that. And so you can come through and just use those filters and get different styles. And then once again, if you're happy with the render, you can come to the document panel here, use this export option, or use the export as screen grab if you want the ZBrush interface as well. And then you can save it out as any image format, and then you can post it up online on that hashtag ZBrush at home. And there you go. So little things there with rendering. All right, so let's go through these questions one more time here. So Cypress is asking if there is a free version. So what there is a trial that you can download and you can play with. And the trial will last for 30 days. So if you want to learn ZBrush, definitely hop into the trial. We also have different ZBrush versions as well. So we have the professional version, which is ZBrush 2020. And then we also have ZBrush Core, which is our light version. Now with ZBrush 2020, we have a bunch of different options in which you can get into ZBrush as well. So we have our perpetual license, and this is a one-time fee. So we've been getting free upgrades ever since ZBrush has been on the market. And so I bought ZBrush when it was like $400 and have never paid for an upgrade. We also have subscription options. So we have a single month subscription plan and a 6-month subscription plan. We also have ZBrush Core, which is our light version of ZBrush, and this has a $10 a month subscription plan. It also has a single perpetual user license as well. So there's a lot of ways you can get into ZBrush and start sculpting. One of our other developers, Daisuke, has been using, he's doing his streams for Japan in ZBrush Core. So if you want to see how ZBrush Core works, you can definitely pop over to one of his streams. His little pip down here at the bottom has been showing when he will be going. All these videos will also be archived and they should be showing up on YouTube after this, so you can rewatch these. I think only once, I think in the past probably year or so we've been doing this, have we lost any videos that have not shown up on the replays, but they should all get on the replays. And then that is the quick rundown there. For Teeth Dav, so I'll be streaming again on Friday, and I'm gonna go through on Friday and I'll be showing you guys how to use the options, some of the other options here. So kind of hitting on the stuff we covered today and doing a little more advanced things, bringing in secondary subtools. So this sculpting session was pretty much just one subtool, getting the basics in, learning how to sculpt, learning how to navigate. On Friday, I'm gonna go in more. We're gonna mess with the Zizu creations here. So there's a lot of different animals in here. We'll start with one of these and we'll actually go in and I'll put some teeth in some sort of creature. So I'll show you guys how we go by doing that. So I think that is it for today. So Solomon will be going tomorrow, so definitely tune in for his, and then I'll be coming back on Friday. So I think that is it. If you guys do any sculpting in ZBrush while you guys are at home or looking for things to do, definitely tell your friends, grab the trowel, play with the version, make some stuff, and then we'd love to see what you guys have been doing. So use that hashtag ZBrush at home and let us see what you guys are working on. And we'll see if you guys get anything good at ZBrush at home, I'll bring them up. Just say, you know, I watched Joseph's stream and we did this, and I'll pull them up on the next one. I'll bring up that Twitter. All right, thank you guys. Hope you have a great day, and stay tuned for more ZClassroom Live events from developers each day, every weekday, till this whole mess ends. I think we're gonna be streaming daily, at least one of us. So a lot of ZBrush information. Thanks, you guys. Take care.